Thank you, Lee, for sitting down with us for Women in Witness today.
You're welcome.
You are the archivist for the Archdiocese, director of the Office of Archives and Records, but you have had a long and winding road
I have.
to get here. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Oh my goodness. I was born in New Orleans, and my parents both raised as Catholic. I have two brothers. I went to Ursuline from kindergarten all the way through high school. I call it, being a lifer. So I spent 13 years there and had a great influence of the sisters that were there. Studied piano while I was there from second grade all the way through high school. So I had one piano teacher who was Sister Elizabeth Marie, who really instilled in me an awful lot of who I think I became, some of that strength and just that Ursuline charism and what you become being part of Ursuline. But the other thing that I ended up with at Ursuline doing, besides the music, was they also introduced us to service work. So with service work, I worked at the association, back then it was called the ARC, the Association of Retarded Citizens. So I fell in love with working with handicapped children as well as doing music. So when I went to college, it was, I think I'll be a music therapist. And Sister Elizabeth Marie told me at one point, she used to call me by my proper name, which was Emily. Emily, one day you will work for the church. And I said, oh no, sister, never. And here we are. Sister Elizabeth Marie must have been praying for you. Yeah, I'm sure she's gotten a big kick out of the last 40 years or so that I've been doing church work.
Mm-hmm. So tell us about that church work.
Well, originally I started out, we got moved around when I was first married, so we moved to Houston, and I fell into a church that needed somebody to play the piano, and so I went into some of the music ministry there while I still was doing other things in music and working with handicapped children. And then from there, it was a great program. They needed someone to teach CCD, and they came to me because they wanted CCD for handicap, for those that were physically challenged and mentally challenged. And so they said, can you start something? I said, okay. So I did, and so we did a lot of music with that as well as working in that. So that's sort of where it grew from. Eventually we moved from Texas back to Baton Rouge, and for about 16 years while I was in Baton Rouge, I was doing music ministry and teaching at the school, at the Catholic school where my sons went to school, and doing music and kind of staying in it, into that kind of work. And then at some point, I decided to go to grad school and do something different. And here I am now.
And it's very different. And so Archives and Records Management, which, I don't think people realize the amount of record keeping and archival work that goes into church.
Right.
And, you are an expert in what is here. And in New Orleans, 300 years worth of records.
Yeah. It's extensive. If you think about church and you think about what's being written, the reason why we are church is because of the Bible, and it's been handed down, and it's written, and it's been, for a while it's been word of mouth, but that is record. And you don't have a church if you don't have that record of Jesus Christ's words, etc. So that becomes critically important for the church to be able to pass down, and not just the Bible and what we know there, but the writings and the teachings of the saints, etc. So there's just a lot of, that's how we know who we are. Storytelling comes in all different ways of us doing that. So in churches, you see the stained glass windows that depict the lives of the saints, and that again is another way of telling the story. The same thing in the statues and in the artwork that's in churches. So that's something else that my office does, is sort of document what's in different places for sacred objects and how we use those in our services.
And yes, and I like how you talked about that. And then the records themselves tell the story of the people who we are.
Exactly.
And our religious traditions and some of the characters that we had as clergy, and what you can glean from looking at who we are, particularly in church in New Orleans. And you've used a lot of that experience to go beyond the Archdiocese of New Orleans, Diocese of Baton Rouge first,
Yes,
Archdiocese
yes,
of New Orleans,
yes.
to become an expert.
Yeah, well, it's been an interesting path. I was into doing my own sort of history and genealogy when I was in Baton Rouge, and a friend of mine came to me and said, there's going to be an opening at the Diocese of Baton Rouge, you should look into it. And I said, I don't want to do this. I know how to work in archives from the outside in. I mean, I know how to work from the outside, yes, in, to be able to do the research. I have no clue on how to do one from the inside out and how to run an archives. And she did a novena.
Prayer.
And well, it did. Her name is Renee. She's still at the Diocese of Baton Rouge, and she's worked with us here as well. And so Renee was really the one that sort of knew that's where I needed to be. While I was in graduate school working on my PhD, I did all the coursework that needed to be done there. And back to those records, though. One of the things we see in the Sacramento records, people are doing genealogy. So they want to know, how do I find my great-great-grandmother? Right. Well, for us, the genealogy is great, but I like to think about the fact that people are tracing the way the faith has come down through the generations. And it doesn't matter how that came down, or what the trouble in your family was, or what your family was experiencing. So we have people that were Native Americans, or those that are African Americans that come from this horrible world of slavery, but the documents are there of the baptism. You and I, my favorite phrase of there's no discrimination at the baptism font. And so we see that in the records. We're able to trace migrations of people. Where did they move? What was the next church? What were the languages? How did the church provide what the people needed through the language that they needed? So that's really the part of the church that I love telling that story, and we get to tell it not only with sharing it with the people that come to us for help, but also in the museum, at the Old Ursuline Convent, and there's just a lot of ways that we can tell that story, and that's just really exciting for me.
And you've been able to take that experience, again, beyond church, and you get to travel remarkable places from being the archivist for the local Catholic Church.
Exactly.
You have been able to take this experience, some of the bad, like the Katrina experiences, and some of the things that we've had to face and struggled with as a community, but some of those experiences and then these stories, and do remarkable things.
Well, Katrina it catapulted me into an international light because of what we did here. And when you start looking at other areas, so New Orleans and the Archdiocese of New Orleans is so large regionally, and we were so heavily affected that people wanted to know our story. And because people think, the United States went in and helped with everything, we were really an under-resourced country at that moment. So we didn't have electricity. You were there while we were trying to dry records, and you can still smell it. It was pretty awful. But you move into that, so people wanted to know our story. So I was invited to the International Council on Archives, their congress that happened in 2008 in Kuala Lumpur, to talk about that experience. What were our lessons learned? How could we continue on from that? And about 4 years later, I ended up on their executive board. I represent all faith traditions, not just the Catholic tradition, at that executive board level. And I've been doing that now for almost 8 years. And I was thinking about this earlier today. So with Notre Dame, with the Notre Dame, the fire, we know European church. Well, I've been able to go, and we think beautiful European churches. In the last 2 years, I've been on the African continent twice now. So I've been in Arusha, which is in Tanzania, and there's the Archdiocese of Arusha. And I'm in a coffee field, and there's a sign, and there's a small wooden church that's their cathedral. And the same thing happened when I was in Cameroon, which is even a more under-resourced country, in Yaoundé. And there again, Archdiocese of Yaoundé. So I take all these pictures. Just recently, I was in the Middle East where there was a beautiful mosque that I got to see. And when I've been in Indonesia, I've seen how the Hindu faith works and get a better understanding. So it's put my Catholicism within a construct, or to be able to understand how it fits in with all the other world religions and what that means. And yet I'll always find the Catholic Church somewhere.
Yeah. And I think I like that. And especially for somebody who's from New Orleans, where you drive 2 miles on the road and there's another Catholic church and
or
there's another Catholic
street.
school. Right. Well, speaking of the languages that require
Exactly.
the church to minister and expand, a triangle of churches. But that's a very different experience. But the idea that the church is still there and the church is still influencing the community and serving the people. In some of the under-resourced countries, the church is a major resource of help for people, and you've been able to see that.
I know.
Firsthand.
It's been extraordinary. I mean, I really love that kind of work and having that opportunity, because I get to represent us and New Orleans, but I'm also representing something much bigger on a global stage, and it's incredible. It's a blessing. It really is a blessing.
And in this world, I laughed. I'm going to bring up something. When we were doing one of the more recent exhibits at the Ursuline Convent, and you found, it was a 300 years of Catholicism, and you found the description of the Archdiocesan Archivist. And there was this lovely picture of an elderly gentleman with a beard and a pipe, and the description of the Archivist, and how different
it is,
and how far we have come. Tell me what your reaction was to that.
It talks about the dusty old tombs and the tomes, which are in the tombs, of these records, and there's always a very kind, soft-spoken gentleman who takes care of these important records. And when one of them dies, another quiet gentleman, mustached, suspenders, comes and takes his place. And I think you and I both said, not anymore.
It's not quite how it is today.
It's not the quiet, reserved. I don't think too many people use that to describe me. But it's about the work, and it's about what we do. And I'm sure they were as energetic and excited about the records as we are. They just were a little more quiet about it.
It was a different time.
It was.
Altogether. It was a different time altogether. I had a conversation a couple months back with Daniela Gisman-Jerome, who's a theologian and worked at Notre Dame Seminary, and the idea of what a theologian is versus her, who is a woman, a wife, a mother, who is also a theologian. And so the roles of women have just changed, and the roles in the church have changed. And what does it mean for you to be able to, as a lay woman, not a religious sister, to take on and represent faith traditions on these international councils?
It's really amazing to be able to do that. It's one of those things that even at that level, there aren't a lot of women that are there at the table, and so you are experiencing different cultures. You're experiencing the way different people talk and react, and there's a lot of protocol involved. And it really is a privilege to be able to do that and to be able to serve in that way. And I'm grateful for the experience.
Well, I want you to close talking to me about, you had Ursuline nuns who sort of mentored you and guided you. What would you want young women who are seeing this to know?
Oh, my goodness. God has a plan, and you don't know what it is. And what you think you want to do when you're young is great, but there are doors that are going to be opened. There's some doors that are going to close. You get to jump through a window then and go do something different. And you just have to be open to that. You have to be able to know that when change is coming, you got to grab it, and you got to decide, okay, this is something different. And women, I think, have that ability to make those changes and grasp it. And I think you have to just face it, be very prayerful about it, and decide, okay, this is a new calling, this is a new direction, that's where I'm going.
Well, Lee, I want to thank you for our work together and what we're able to do with Archives and Records and sharing the story of the church, just not now, but in the past story of the church, and for your witness here today.
Well, thank you, Sarah.